Hello, everybody. Uh, those of you that know me know that I'm really into being punctual, as I've done a couple hundred of these types of podcasts, with the exception of those with Leo Lionsagami, have all been started right on the hour. And that's a good thing. And that's to be able to have the ability to have rhythmic activity within your life. What it does is it fashions your relationship to your etheric body of memory, that which you share with the plant kingdom, the body of life, the one that modern science really doesn't understand. And so they come up with the craziest notions regarding why things appear to happen. And so there's just this interesting relationship between that etheric body and the astral body, which you share with the animal kingdom. Of course, we have it ego, and that is that divine essence that was donated to us through the exousiae, as they're called in the Bible. They're called Elohim, and singular form is Eloah. So Jehovah is in Eloah. He's one of the Elohim. And so, as we're discussing spiritual science here, that would just my saying those few things would tend to chase the materialist away. That's okay later for them or not. And let's see, everybody's saying hello over there on the side. I'm going to be joined very shortly, at least I believe I am, by Joe Visconti. And let me just check the message systems to see if he's giving me some kind of shout out due to a technical difficulty, of which these things do happen. Please excuse my brief silence. Uh, Nothing from there. Well, I'll just continue talking and he will sign in whenever he gets around to it. So, in looking at this and trying to understand this whole idea of, yeah, the Grail Knights and the Grail Maidens, that's a good way to symbolize what we're attempting here. And as Dean McKenna says, greetings, Grail Knights and Grail Maidens. Yes, so what is that? That special relationship between these two magical halves of humanity. And as Agatha Velvet says, good morning, ladies and gents. So, yes, good morning. Well, it's kind of funny that that came up because I was thinking about today's show and then I happened to just, my eyes landed on this wonderful little volume in its nice little slipcase, King René's Book of Love. And yes, it's a wonderful excursion, Liqueur d'Amours Esprits. And it's from the National Library in Vienna. And in there is a series of illustrated images. Here is King René, and you see he's in his bed, and his heart is being offered, and that there's this magical insistence going on there. And he's an interesting individual as he has a relationship to Joan of Arc. But René d'Anjou, let's from 1409 to 1480 AD, and he was Duke of Anjou, Count of Provence, also King of Naples, and he's often referred to as Good King René. He was a member of the House of Valois d'Anjou, which is the cadet branch of the French royal house. And he was the great grandson of John II of France. And so he's very interesting because that whole idea of the Grail impulses that flowed through Europe and the idea of that there was this recognition of the supersensible as being something very real in one's understanding of the world in which we live. And so with Good King René, you look at this whole idea of the troubadours, and he was like a troubadour king, right? And so he was very creative, and it ties into this whole idea of the troubadours and the minnesingers, and that there's this whole interplay between the realm of the breath and the heart. But that's a realm in which is very prominent within musicians that to strive for an understanding of how is the realm of thinking united with the realm of feeling, right? And so I thought we'd explore some of that today, seeing as how we have Joe Visconti here from West Hartford, and he's a very accomplished musician himself, piano player, amongst other talents, songwriter, Grammy Award winning, film producer, frequent political figure. And so what's most interesting to me, of course, is that he's had a lifetime of study of the work of Dr. Rudolf Steiner. How you doing there, Joe?
Pretty good. I'm hearing you, but you're a little low. Maybe the waves in the background. I'm at the beach on the beach house front porch, and the ocean is about 80 feet from me or less. So beautiful day here. A little hazy, but it's not that cold in Connecticut.
Maybe the Undines are jealous and compete.
So how are we proceeding today? I missed the intro.
That was indicative of there's this whole interplay between the etheric and the astral, and between the heart and the head. And really, in the times in which we're living now, again, I want to go back to something. I'll share this. I keep sharing it, but I think that it's critically important during this current period, all the things that are going on in the world. But Rudolf Steiner says, and I quote, "We must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes towards us out of the future. We must acquire serenity in all feelings and sensations about the future. We must look forward with absolute equanimity to everything that may come. And we must think only that whatever comes is given to us by a world directive full of wisdom. It is part of what we must learn in this age, namely, to live out of pure trust without any security in existence. Trust in the ever present help of the spiritual world. Truly, nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us. And let us seek the awakening from within ourselves every morning and evening." End quote. So there you have it. I mean, that's the spirit in which we're striving, right? That's the trajectory that we're trying to accomplish here. But what is that? It has to do with the right relationship between the vehicles, the astral, the etheric, and the physical. And it very much ties into a conversation Joe and I were having earlier. Without even needing to go there, what we could say is that there's this whole drama that's unfolding relating to how past karma is meeting mankind in the current age. And so Douglas and I had a conversation the other day, and he also mentioned it in one of his frequent videos. Douglas Gabriel, my old best buddy and my greatest teacher and greatest pupil. And but that whole concept of that we're living in a time that recapitulates the ancient Egyptian period. And so we're the same number of years after the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And they were the same number of years before. And Rudolf Steiner makes mention of the fact of that the angels that were the guardian angels of that time period have a relationship to mankind in our current time period. And I know this is a bit of a stretch for most people to try and wrap your head around, but if you're serious about scripture, one thing you have to acknowledge about scripture is there's all these angels and super sensible beings all over the place. And maybe it's just possible that there are people that actually understand these things.
And it's funny because between the pyramids and the Greco-Roman architecture, you'd have to say to yourself, they believed in all these spirits and gods and they worshiped this, and at the same time they did calculus and algebra and things that we can't do presently. So whatever they're smoking, I want some of that, if that's what they were doing, because it was light years. But you touched upon something. I've been thinking about this for a while with the guardian angels, and I may have mentioned it before, and I'm sure you and Doug have mentioned it plenty of times. It has to do with the encounter of each of our guardian angels when we're about to have a karma, and karma doesn't always mean we cause something bad and we have to repay it. It's got a bad name today in modern society where people believe karma is all debt ridden. And you even see karma, they have what they call it. The karma is the credit rating agency, and you can get grace periods. So you start to see grace and karma financially in our time. But how the guardian angels actually meet, and they set up, it sounds insane to regular people, but they set up a meeting between themselves so that you and I, Doug, as we met. So there's arrangements at the very small things in life also. This isn't grandiose. People have the wrong idea of God, heaven, the other side. They're working here in the most minute things that we would laugh at, that they were interested in our lives. But the guardian angels do that. And Rudolf Steiner speaks about the times that we're living in and moving in, where the guardian angels, luciferically, the ones that won't work together. You're seeing that politically, you're seeing that institutionally, where there will not be that meeting that's always by precedent required before something on the earth occurs between these guardian angels. And I'd love John to talk about something he's mentioned many times that have to do with time and Christ in space, because that right there, I think, is the key. Knowing that the angels can't meet, some won't meet, karma cannot be worked out, which is the reason we're here. Destiny is also part of karma. Is another word is destiny, a destination, a thing you're going to become. So karma and destiny are much, much more than debt ridden. But that space where Christ is looking to repair space or time, and the space beings that our men are trying to turn us into. John, why don't you take off on that one? Because that fear comes from that. There's a fear that blocks those guardian angels. There's a fear between the people.
Yes, it's really true. Karma is a Sanskrit word. It means action. And so it has neither a negative nor a positive connotation. It just refers to an activity. And so if you look at the supersensible being of a human, and you understand that we have a physical body, it's governed by physical laws, and it is penetrated by a life body of formative forces and memory, and that which is shared with the realm of the plants. They have that, but they don't have an astral body. The astral body has to do with the ability to have sensate relationship to the world and have movement and being self-moved. Now there are plants, like your Venus flytrap that has very rudimentary capacity. Rudolf Steiner indicates that the penetration of the astral into the plant is the reason that this can take place. So there are always kind of transitional stages in between that you can find in nature. And so the usual relation between the astral and the etheric in the kingdom of nature, you'll see in the brilliant colors in the flowers in the spring, for example, that it's that astral coming down and working into the etheric that brings into being the luscious world of colors that we find in the sleep of summer. And I say sleep of summer because really one sleeps into the life of the senses in the summer. But then when you go into the fall past the festival of Michaelmas, you go into the winter season. And what is the winter season? All these plants are like turning brown and returning to the earth, and certain beings that work within the plant realm and are out in nature as these forces that go into the roots, that when winter comes along, they're released from that activity and they become a force that works now from outside, and that's referred to in the northern mythos as the Jotuns, the frost giants. And so you have that there's actual beings out there that are working the interrelationship between these vehicles. And that's where you get the stories, so many of them in the fairy tales, myths, and legend of the little people, the elves and gnomes and fairies and all of these things. Some of us have seen them, such as myself, and so there's something there. I didn't talk about it when I was young because I knew I was smart enough to know people would think I was nuts, and but I don't see them all the time. It comes and goes, and it's very interesting and it's fun to talk about because they are pretty hilarious. They have a whimsical way of doing things. I remember one time, I've told this story, but it's a couple of years ago, I think. But I was in a hurry. I had this neat little house that I was living by a brook. In fact, the name of the street was Brookside. And but I had this little brownie, house brownie, that was maybe about 8 or 9 inches tall that I would see, and he had this kind of little puppet face, and a little hat and the whole deal, and kind of looked like a Pinocchio, but without the big nose, And I would see him from time to time, and he would then transform into a globe of light and fly off, and my cat would chase the globe of light, And then sometimes he'd catch it, and then he'd like, or she would look at it like, where'd it go? Because it would disappear. But these beings can work through levels of being, and in order to work on a different level of being, they change their relationship to the world of form. And so that's why you see that these beings are described differently in the different continents, that what they look like, because they're working with the thought nature of the individuals that perceive them and clothing themselves in that kind of a representation. That's why Japanese elemental beings look different from Irish ones. And so that's an interesting thing to know. But he looked definitely Irish to me. But anyways, one day I was trying to leave the house very quickly, and then I spun around, and in my peripheral vision, I saw he was down there, and I stopped because I didn't want to step on him, just as a reflex. And I put my hands up. He did the same thing. He mimicked me. He did he put his hands up and wobbled, and then he flew off as a globe of light. And my cat Shakti ran after him, and that was when she actually caught him, but there was nothing there when she caught whatever she was chasing. And so it's pretty interesting that, yes, your pets do see these things.
I was at about 12 years old, and I had a fever, and we lived in Florida at the time. And I knew about these things through folklore. My mom used to talk about them, but I had a fever, and I saw probably 15 or 20 of them in my bedroom running around, and my brother was there, my mother. I was grabbing my clothes to run away because I said the little people, they were everywhere, and they had small little spears, and they were probably, like you said, 8 inches tall. And I, of course, was in an altered state, so science would say, yeah, we're hallucinating. I sure was, but I got hallucinated about a lot of things. But why so many of them? A little small Robin Hoods, with spears and running right through. And I was in the median state, in a fever state and the worlds were opening up pre-puberty, just around puberty for me. But you see that with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Disney does a whole thing on it. The folklore, also for contractors or builders and carpenters, and they know a lot. I mentioned this, I think, before on your show. I knew enough as a builder that there was forces, and we just didn't know what they were, but we'd say, be careful, because of accidents around a certain doorway of an old house working on it, or a pathway, or near a brook. Safety was, just when I was young, it was much more talked about by the Italians, and just a lot of folklore, almost like the time of the apothecaries. There was another world of wisdom and wives' tales and homebrew things that were faded in the mid-century of 20th century.
Yeah, Mary says here, I have seen them little ones, a gnome and a fairy in a backyard on a log, never told except one person.
Yeah, why don't we tell them?
Stared at each other. The gnome looked angry. The fairy looked scared. I backed off, saying, I won't hurt you. Yes. They have their own.
Everybody knows, but nobody talks.
Yeah, they have their own things to keep them busy. You don't need to disturb them. In fact, it's not a good idea because they can be somewhat quixotical. We used to put on conferences. We'd bring in people from Findhorn Gardens in Scotland, David Spangler, Peter Caddy, and Eileen, and it was wonderful knowing these people. But one of the experiences is that when you come into the relationship with something like this, it's very much an affirmative when you have the same experience that someone else does. They can see it too. And I was talking to David Spangler one time. We brought him in, and we had a private thing going on with a group of people in Brian Lynch's living room, and I was sitting talking to David, and I was like right in front of him, maybe a foot and a half apart from each other, and we're talking, and my little guy shows up, and he's standing right in front of me with his arms crossed, and David looks down and brushes him away, and the globe of light flew off, and he looked at me and smiled, and so it was like, yeah, he sees them too, so this is not, that that takes it out of the consideration for the realm of hallucination, or some psychiatrists
Yeah.
say, well, you're having a group hallucination, yeah, of the same thing. How does that work?
I want to introduce our pet Ruby here. She's a Scottish Terrier. She's just nipping at my feet here. I figured I'd bring her on camera, get her on YouTube, huh, Ruby? What do you think?
She's a beaut.
Oh
Hello
yeah,
there, pretty girl.
2 years old. I got her at the beach house. My daughter's in New Orleans, and so I got the task of taking her to the beach house this weekend. And
So anyway, so I thought I tend to talk about things that things that are on my mind, which kind of makes sense. And there's a statement that Rudolf Steiner had made in I believe it's lecture 8 or 9, where he's talking about the mysteries in ancient Ireland, the Hibernian mysteries, which is kind of apropos. We got a little Scotty dog. The Scots, the real Scots descend from the Irish that came across from Ireland into Scotland. And so you have this relationship to the ancient mystery center that Rudolf Steiner referred to as great mysteries. That's the Hibernian mysteries in Ireland. And within there, he gives a very complementary and complex image, or a series of images of the significance of the ancient mysteries, which works really well in tandem with the Wonders of the World lecture cycle that I frequently make reference to as the lecture cycle, that there's two kinds of anthroposophists, the ones that have read that lecture cycle and the ones that haven't, because there's certain ideas in there that are so fundamental for one's understanding of spiritual science that if you haven't read those, well, you don't know. And that's the way it always is with Steiner. You think you got it all figured out, and then all of a sudden they'll come out with this new translation of lectures that have never been in English. And sure enough, no, you didn't quite understand it, because there's that whole mystery of time, like what Joe was referring to, that things, you have to be very flexible in your thinking, because the interrelationship between the etheric, physical, astral, and ego goes through transformations throughout history. And so it's not always the same. And that's why it's frustrating to some people when they read Steiner, because, why isn't he giving definitions of these? This is too complicated. And yes, it is. It's the most difficult subject we could study. There's no question about it. Just from the sheer scope of the work, 6,700 lectures, 50 published books and articles is quite a large body of work, especially something that's so complex does not define things, so that you have to continually approach things from a new context, in which Joe and I have discussed numerous times on here, is that whole idea of continually approaching a subject from a different context and perspective to develop one into a living relationship with the reality that he's talking about, rather than an abstract concept of that reality.
And that's very scary. We've mentioned this before. It's very scary. People have a lot of fear, because what Steiner actually did, God bless him, was everything we should have been taught in religion and in school. He had to deliver it, a correction of it, to put it into reality. But people have a fear of it, because it really, I don't know why I or you or Doug or many others don't fear it. What I do, and this is important to share with people maybe listening that haven't absorbed a lot of Rudolf Steiner, is I keep my world, I've always done this since a young man, kept my world understanding. I'm not going to throw what I know out in the world so I can communicate with ordinary people that don't know any of this, and then add this information, put it up there, for, I don't know, almost like evidence in a trial. The judge being someone objective in my own mind, and I would not beat it up, because Steiner does say to try to disprove it or try to work on it, make it your own, or throw it out, but don't accept it just on face value. And then the prosecutor would put evidence in, the defense attorney would put evidence in on these issues, and I'd leave it in this limbo state and let it work on me, and never bring it in as though it's a cult and I must start droning out these concepts and believe them, believe them, believe them. It doesn't enter it like we did in school or with the priest, believe this in Sunday school. This is what happened, almost like Stalinism. This, and we're not given any time or space in education, religious or secular, to be able to say, wait a minute, where'd that come from? We just take these things in. Well, Rudolf Steiner, you don't. And right now you're given a gift because you could say, let me look at this. Oh, and then you start to find out, if you can stick with it enough, you hear this a lot in your head. Oh, that's what that means. Well, that's what they meant in the Bible. Oh, that's what they really meant. Oh, that's what that is. And then that's only one side you saw. Then you'll see another side later on from some other issue or lecture or task or your own development in life, wherever it brings you, and go, oh, son of a gun. And you feel this completeness in life. If you even care or interested in life, oh, and there's not enough of that, oh, in our time. It's just take it, program information, memorize it, let it fall into your, unconscious, and just leave it alone. You got your degree or you got your graduate from school. But those aha moments, or those, oh, I understand, because the Bible or education didn't really tell you anyway. And if you're inquisitive and you really want to search to be more of a human being, I guess that's it. So you're not angry at things. You're not one-sided. You're not just gullible. You're piece at a time. You're climbing this mountain, one little rock in peace. And you have to enjoy it. You have to accept it and not be curious. Because for me, it was never curiosity. It was, I want to know why that is. Nobody told us, especially our time growing up, in the younger days, there was no information. But people are afraid of what I've just described, that process. They don't go there. And if you try to bring them there, their mind wants to close quickly and get on with their ordinary life, because these questions in today's time, when there's catastrophes and potential World War IIIs and all that's happening to us, that's when people are questioning, wait a minute, how do we get here? You got here every step of the way when you didn't question, wonders of the world, ask, consider, be interested in it, and you just let yourself endure the programming of education.
Yes. And that's from the standpoint of your religious background. And then if you go into the realm of science, it's very interesting what Rudolf Steiner says about that, because he talks about how they take their understanding of the mineral realm and they attempt to apply it on the human body, which means, of course, you can only speak really accurately in that regard when you're talking about a corpse, right? Because it's no longer alive and it reverts to those physical laws. And he says it's very important to understand, and I paraphrase, is that we have to respect the true observations of science, that there's a lot of things that they've been able to come to perception of, but that where the problem lies is that where they then assume that means. It has to do with the meaning of whatever particular fact that they've been able to uncover through observation. A good example, when I was involved with Ralph Marinelli in doing the heart research, and Douglas was in the mix, and James Stewart over at the archive, he was in the mix, and all these doctors. Because in our monastic club, as we called it, it was like our inner circle of people in Detroit at the time in the late 70s into the early 80s. There were all these wonderful people coming to the Waldorf Institute, and included amongst them quite a constellation of people, many of whom owned esoteric bookstores in other cities. And Detroit became so interesting at that time that they moved here. And so they could go to the institute, and these people would come in the bookstore, and we'd have study circles. So one of the things that happened while that was going on was there was a publication called The Heart Lectures by Ehrenfried Pfeiffer, who was the founder of biodynamic gardening. And in there, he explained the significance of the heart in understanding spiritual science, and that because, see, Rudolf Steiner elsewhere had said on numerous occasions, the heart is not a pump. And Pfeiffer shared that if we are to overcome this fear matrix in which we're living, and I'm just paraphrasing, that we have to get past thinking of the heart as some kind of pump, that's not what's going on there. And so in working with Ralph, he had come to the conclusion regarding the rotational movement, and I was his lab assistant, and we would do like Doppler, where you have these sensors and you could hear the motion, and just from the listening to the sounds that was making, it was clear because there were different frequencies, that there were different streams that could be detected, different velocities expressing themselves within the motion of the heart. So that would show the different velocities in the coursing of the blood. And we did it on the blood vessels, and you would hear this sound. If you listen to the heart, it was like whew, 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 whew. And it's literally, that's what it sounded like through the Doppler. And having one of our friends who was a physicist and an anthroposophist take a look at the thing, calculating the variables with a frequency analysis, was able to come up with actual numbers for the various velocities. I don't want to get into that right now. I want to get into another part of it, because we had come to the conclusion that the movement of the blood through the body was in a vortex form, which had never been said basically by anybody except for in the earliest stages of the embryo, where they had been able to observe the movement of the blood, the first movement of the blood in the embryo before the blood creates the blood vessels. Okay, so there's blood flowing, and it's flowing in the spiraling stream. Okay, so what happens is that this video shows up from some researchers in England who had put a fiber optic camera into a blood vessel, and you could see these boluses of blood going by, spiraling like dynamically. I mean, that, we always think of the blood as like kind of slogging along like the the tributaries of the Mississippi, with the riverboat slowly floating by, and it's the blood vessels are all full of blood, and it's all moving all over. And that's not what's going on at all. There's these boluses of blood, there's gaps between them of vapor, and they're spiraling at high velocity. I mean, it's the most dynamic thing you've ever seen, which is what we had concluded. So it was a wonderful confirmation. But then you go into, well, what does that mean?
Well, these are three things in threefolding that you can look at, and people can actually threefold themselves. Just use your conjecture in your mind. Look at the thinking process. The way the world sees it today, it is a calculator. There is no space. It's just calculating in digits, logic circuits, zeros and ones, and that's what they believe your brain is doing. Completely void of anything except for calculation, which is programmed already, unless there's a deficiency in your brain and is broken. That's what the brain does. The heart is a hydraulic pump. It's not the logic circuit of a solar calculator like the brain, but it's a pump. And the will forces are a conveyor belt of anything that gets put on them. They just run it out. Every one of these is the linear process of linear and mechanical, devoid of any room for space. And why would that be? Because the enemy of this time would be the spirit, and everything that forces in our time one interprets through science what the human being is a complete machine. The space does not have, there's no space, there's no time in their own equations of what we are. Think about a machine, a calculator. There's no space and why. Measure, number, and weight. Their whole commitment is to convert everything living and remove time. Remove it. And they're actually with space, if you think about this, what I'm explaining is the interpretation of what's happening in our time. But the spirit moves, and we talked about this yesterday, I believe, offline, John, about the bread and the blood, about the nerve and the blood and the bread and the wine. If you think about that, there's always a space, and the spirit is not given in measure. In other words, there's this place that has it's a space, but time is different there. And this is what's been removed completely from all science right now. That place they know exists, even between atoms or everything you see under the microscope, but they want it to be mechanical. And one thing leads to the next mechanical and the next mechanical. This is devoid of spirit, pure and simple.
Yes, and really the way to approach it is indicated by Rudolf Steiner. He says, and I quote, "In our time, the most important thing is to bring forward truths, put plainly, to give lectures about truths. What people then do about this is up to their freedom. One should go no further than to lecture on, to communicate truths. Whatever consequences there are should follow as a free decision. Thus, as consequences follow when decisions are made out of the impulses one has on the physical plane. It's exactly the same in the case of things that can only be guided from the spiritual world itself."
Again, it's time, it's space, it's this thing that they fear. I'll call it they. Science, academia, the world we live in today, everything has to be digitized to the 500th, 0.00077. Everything qualitative, which is spirit and humanity and love. Everything qualitative in our time needs to be turned into the quantitative. And this force by Arman is seeking to take everything that is human, that has that time and freedom, because in that space is the freedom to err, the freedom to change your mind, the freedom to do, what is it? Why I said liberty. It's not connected like the calculator of the brain that they think they see, or the mechanical hydraulic pump of the heart that they conceive, or the conveyor belt of the will. There is room to it's a human being that could be pumping. A human being could be using an abacus. A human being could be loading a truck with bales of corn or whatever. In other words, that human being movement, it's been removed, right, from manufacturing. It's been removed, the human element, and they've removed it in the concepts of what a human being is. And the capital, I don't want to just blame it on capitalism and automation, but those processes are considered what we are today. And anyone who wants to have that freedom and space to choose, to deliberate, to look at things from a different position, to adapt differently, doesn't have a space at the shopping stores or Walmarts. That product has no space in their concepts. There's no shelf room for open ideas and other ways. It must be the products, in this case, the theories and the propaganda that they're putting out about, because that's what it is, scientific propaganda. And there is no room for anything they don't control and they don't own on the shelves. And why do I call it the shelves? Because you go shopping in your own heart and mind for things that you're looking for to solve your own problems, to understand life. If someone has a personal problem, a loved one, health issues, whatever, you can't. There's only what they're selling. And that's the problem today. It's going to get more and more severe, or we won't even be able to have these types of conversations.
Yeah, so when you broaden your purview, so to speak, so that you at least leave the door open through the healthy suspension of disbelief, as Rudolf Steiner characterizes. But in his lectures on the Whitsun Festival, he speaks of the immense, unfathomable life in reference to the soul life, real, actual life of the soul being brought into the cosmos. And he says, think how dead the cosmos appears to us when we look out into the far spaces and see nothing but burning gaseous bodies. Think how living it all becomes when we know that the stars are an expression of the love with which the astral cosmos works upon the etheric cosmos, where this is to express it with perfect truth. Think of those mysterious processes when certain stars suddenly light up at certain times, processes which have only been explained to us by means of physical hypotheses that do not lend to any real understanding. Stars that were not there before light up for a time and disappear again. Thus, in the cosmos, too, there is a stroking of shorter duration. For it is indeed true that in epochs when divine beings desire to work in a special way from the astral world into the etheric, we behold new stars light up and fade away again.
And that cannot fit into the perfect world of academia and science. There can't be fluctuations, there can't be anomalies, because then something else is in control other than their own scientific propaganda and theories. Jehovah said, I'm a jealous God, I'll have no other God before me. Well, science is saying the same thing. I will have no other science before me. That's what science is saying, and it refuses to allow a different reality, which is actually complete reality. So and this is being done in the universe, it's being done in the individual. And what's the answer to this? Open-mindedness. These are the exercises of Rudolf Steiner: concentration on an object or emotion or piece of art, open-mindedness, positive thinking, strengthening the will. Every one of these are your procedures to refute what you're being handed by news media, by science, by academia, by your own mind that's committed to the training that it received. So with anthroposophy, you're constantly, I've always been constantly, not necessarily trying to remove my education, because I was raised in the time of late 50s and early 60s when education just wasn't that tough and rote. It was still alive. And so I didn't have the brainwashing in my own personal life. I was able to wonder between, and that's the key. It goes back to wondering. I wonder why this is like this. I wonder why like that. I wonder why this. And those one-word answers from science, they're not holding water anymore. Everybody knows. They can't hide it anymore. So I believe, as Steiner said, with medicine and science, it will become spiritualized because they are forward-thinking, forward-moving, and eventually new generations will be much more acceptance of not theories, but the evidence that they can't refute, whether they could sell it, patent it, trademark it, copyright it. They're not going to refute it. And I believe it's already happening. It's going to increase. So we're totally in a transition period. But again, it's about consciousness. It's about willingness to wonder, willingness to accept what you find in contradiction to what you may know without losing your sense of value. And you talked about this. I believe Doug talked about this the other day. Science never says, I'm sorry, I taught you all these things for years in these books in college, and now I was full of crap, and I want you to believe this now. They don't say that. They gloss over it. They don't even gloss over it. They just go the other direction. And every error, every false path they sent people down all these decades and 100 years, they claim no responsibility. Yet they expect us to swallow their next And the bottom line is if they don't correct their path, they won't have the conscience to say we were wrong. We better think about the next thing we're pushing a lot deeper. Oops, but we can't. We got a grant from Monsanto. We have to think about it the way Monsanto told us, or Carnegie Corporation, or Mellon. And so this is the problem. Their intermingling of profit seeking, the threefold order is broken. And money is into science, money is into medicine. Get the outcomes we need, the studies we need, so we can own the Pfizer patent and receive government contracts for controls. But see, it all goes right back to this thing we're speaking about: time, space, liberty, freedom, objective thinking, wondering, wanting the best, and being strong enough in our identity to not feel threatened because we discovered we erred or we did not have the complete understanding.
Yes, of course. Good old Mammon, who Rudolf Steiner said that the spirit of materialism, Ahriman, just like he hates being laughed at, and the most powerful thing you can do in the face of Ahriman, the spirit of materialism, is just laugh. He will just shrink. It's like the wicked witch of the West melting in the Wizard of Oz. You know, it's you have to realize that you are front and center in this drama, and that you arise out of the divine substance that was donated by the realm of the exousiae, the spirits of form, and that's the essential nature of the human soul, whereas the adversarial powers are manifestation of the thoughts of these beings that sacrifice their own substance to give us our I am. The adversarial beings, they don't have that. And so in a certain sense they are to be pitied, but they can move forward nonetheless because everything is evolving. But to continue on the concept here, Rudolf Steiner says in the same lecture, Whitsit Festival lecture, we ourselves in our own astral body have feelings of delight and comfort in the most varied ways. In like manner, in the cosmos, through the cosmic astral body, we have the varied configuration of the starry heavens. No wonder that an ancient science, instinctively clairvoyant, describes this third member of our human organism as the astral or starry body, which astral means starry, yes? Seeing that it is of like nature with that which reveals itself to us in the stars. It is only the ego that we do not find revealed in the cosmic environment. Why is this? We shall find the reason if we consider how this human ego manifests here on earth, in a world that is in reality threefold: physical, etheric, and astral. The ego of man, as it appears within the universe, is ever and again a repetition of former lives on earth. And again it finds itself in the life between death and a new birth. But when we observe the ego in its life between death and a new birth, we perceive that the etheric, which we have here in the cosmic environment of the earth, has no significance for the human ego. The etheric body is laid aside soon after death. It is only the astral world that shines in towards us through the stars that has significance for the ego in the life between death and a new birth. And in that world which glistens in towards us through the stars, in a world there live the beings of the higher hierarchies, with whom man forms his karma between death and a new birth. Indeed, when we follow this ego in its successive evolutions through lives between death, birth and death, and between death and new birth, we cannot remain within the world of space at all, for two successive earthly lives cannot be within the same space. They cannot be within that universe which is dependent on spatial coexistence. Here, therefore, we go right out of space and enter into time. This is actually so. We go out of space and come into the pure flow of time when we contemplate the ego in its successive lives on Earth. End quote.
And that's why that karma of the gods that we work with, the hierarchies between death and rebirth, is so under attack by Ahriman and the confusion with the guardian angels I spoke about earlier in this, we opened up. This is the work that we've done to prepare our lives on earth. Your life has a meaning and you co-created it. That's where freedom really lies. People say, do I have the freedom to do what I want? Yeah, you did that when you were preparing this life. You just don't know it. And now it's in front of you. The choice was made. Take it. Well, I want to change it. Well, you want to be willful? Then be willful and go against that which you co-created as you want to enter the world. This again gets down into those areas we spoke about with abortion and termination of life, because there's also the abortion of karma, a new phrase I just brought up over here. And this is exactly what's occurring. Armand and his host are seeking with other beings. I'll leave that up to Doug to go into that detail on another show in another galaxy. But they're looking to abort your karma. And you're helping them when you cannot stay with that which you chose, because it's usually something you don't feel right about. There's something that's that kink that Sorath puts in us that makes us just not feel right about the things we have to do. We feel we're being forced in these time of rights to do that which we don't want to do. But that's exactly the feeling you'll get when you have to do that thing that you want to do. But this abortion of karma occurs because we have created this. And here's the other thing, it's so important. Your karma, the things that you worked with before you were born that made you who you are and developed into who you're going to be, it didn't happen the day after you left your mother's womb. This occurred way before. You could know that materialistically by the fact that you're coming home to your mom's house and they have a bedroom ready for you, and your aunts and your birthday parties in the school down the street you're going to, and the friends you're going to meet. It's all set up. So you can't say that your karma, for those who want to practice those acts as though they're okay, that if you didn't get aborted, that it wouldn't matter. Your soul comes in, if you have one, right out of the birth canal. No, it doesn't. And I've fought a lot of religious people in politics about that, saying you're really not a human being. Life begins after you're born. That means the soul comes in after you're born, which means your karma or your destiny and all that gets built after you're born. Just take a look at it. Just debate it like Aristotle would. No, I don't think that could happen. Your bedroom's down the street. Your toys are already bought. Your name is already picked. That was done before you came out of your mother's birth canal. And this is important to understand, because it is the abortion of karma that is really the number one enemy of the dark. I'll call him the Dark Lord. But the space and the time, again, are so important, because that time element that Christ is seeking to heal and repair for us in that moment of time, there's just miracles every day in 1 second. We're always given that gift.
Yes, in theosophical circles, they have a term, they call them the Lords of the Dark Phase. And that's those beings that seem to be running a great deal of activity on Earth at the present time and can't wait to create more chaos and death. And so there is all of that. But let's fly high above them. Rudolf Steiner continues. Now consider this, my dear friends. In space, time is still present, of course. But within this world of space, we have no means of experiencing time in itself. We always have to experience time through space and spatial processes. For example, if you wish to experience time, you look at the clock, or if you will, at the course of the sun. What do you see? You see the various positions of the hands of the clock or the sun. You see something that is spatial through the fact that the positions of the hand or the sun are changed. Through the fact that spatial things are present to you as changing, you gain some idea of time. But of time itself, there really is nothing in this spatial perception. There are only varied spatial configurations, varied positions of the hands of the clock, varied positions of the sun. You only experience time itself when you come into the sphere of the soul's experience. There you do really experience time, but there you also go out of space. There, time is a reality. But within the earthly world of space, time is no reality. What then must happen to us if we would go out of the space in which we live between birth and death and enter into the spacelessness in which we live between death and a new birth? What must we do? The answer is this: we must die. So you could die on your deathbed, or you can die before you die. You know, and there's an old mystical saying, "I die daily."
And
The Knights Templar, they consider themselves already dead. That was their contemplation of life, that they were already dead, and therefore they were fearless. You can't hurt them; they're already dead. You know, so
well,
they've already given themselves over, uh, blood, nerve, and sinew to their service of Christ. It's a total surrendering of your egotistical ego to that whole idea of your higher ego, which has to do with that which is referred to as Kyrios within the Bible, the Lord, and of which your personality that you like to identify with and might prefer red shirts over green ones, but nonetheless, that little figurine which we are is the least part of that entelechy, the Kyrios.
as you were speaking about the sun with the dial, I realized this. A new thought, for whatever it's worth. I'll put it out there because these are the things that happen, and this is how they happen. As you talked about the sundial, and the hours of time, think about this concept. Right now, here in the East, it's 2 o'clock. The conditions of warmth are a certain condition. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour from now, every time, warmth will change. Warmth will change all night, tomorrow morning. So as the clock goes, warmth, I don't care where you live, changes. It's never 60 degrees all day long. It changes over time. So people would say, well, that's a condition. It's just the sun or the wind. But just think about the flexibility and the freedom and the changing that occurs with warmth, because warmth is so important with love. Warmth is so important. It comes from the physical realm of Saturn, but the warmth element, the warmth ether, there's so many layers, and this is what we spoke about, walking around a tree, a different perspective. Your mind opens up to these things when you're studying Steiner, when you're sharing this, as we are doing now. We learn, discover much more on the path as we share it. Even if we were not on YouTube right now, we would still be on a phone conversation going, oh, I didn't think about that. Warmth, the warmth ether, the chemical ether, the tone ether, all of them are changing with the clock all day long. But how do we use measure, number, and weight to tax them, to buy them, to sell them, to trademark them? We can't. So if you can't own it in our time, it doesn't exist and it's not real. It's just wild, abandoned chaos that's outside the sphere of their control and therefore your control.
Yes, getting into the biological aspect of it, uh, if you study the tattvas, the cycle of the elements as they relate to the breath, and this is what we're talking about here, is that relationship between the lungs and the heart, and the relationship between nerves and the blood. And so when you get into understanding these things on a deeper level, very profound insights can arise as a result of meditating on this content. And so, like what, by all means, catch Douglas Gabriel's podcast he did the other day on cosmology, because it gives you that some definite food for thought. Because, geez, every year they have to change their story. These scientific guys with their subtle science that changes every year. It's like, what's missing from that? But when we get into it, let's dig a little deeper. Rudolf Steiner says unfathomable depths are really contained in this simple conception that all that to which I have just referred had to exist in order that we, as earthly human beings, might enter this earthly life. Infinite depths are revealed when we really grasp the spiritual aspect of all that is thus put before us. If we conceive the spiritual in its completeness as a self-contained whole, if we consider it in its own purity and essence, then we have a conception of what was called God by those people who limited their outlook to the world of space alone. These peoples, at any rate in their wisdom teachings, had come to feel the cosmos is woven through and through by a divine element that is at work in it, and we can distinguish from this divine element in the cosmos that which is present on the earth in our immediate environment as the physical world. We can also distinguish that which in this cosmic divine spiritual world reveals itself as the etheric, namely that which gazes down upon us in the blue of the sky. We can distinguish as the astral in this divine world that which gazes down upon us in the configuration of the starry heavens. So you have this juxtaposition of the etheric and the astral, and that Rudolf Steiner talks about the blue of the sky as an expression of the etheric, and the starlight that we see, that's an expression of the astral activity of the beings of all these various stars and star systems and so forth. And so that it's just truly profound, because in contemplating these things, you unite with them on a certain level that's beyond this our relationship to the world of space. And so I remember a conversation one time with Dane Rudier, who's one of the fathers of modern psychological astrology, and he's Belgian, and he's a wonderful soul. But I was having lunch with him and some other people one time, and I asked him about meditating on individual stars. He says, be very careful meditating on individual stars, because if you go to them, they can come to you. So that's some good advice. Yeah, it's like, careful what it goes back to, like you mentioned, like Disney, before they got creepy, but you have Mickey Mouse with the Sorcerer's Apprentice story that's tied into a good story related to Goethe in that whole scenario, the mythic content, where he starts messing around with the magic book. Before he knows, he's got all these mops, army of mops, and water flooding all over the place. It's like, you don't tinker with the super sensible, although the super sensible does not like to be ignored.
Recognition of the super sensible is key, and that's where it was always in religion, worship, or go to church, recognize your higher aspect. In our time, it will remain positive. I do believe people are awakening over the last couple of years with COVID and death at their door every day, potentially. People have woken up. I think it was a blessing, even if it was organized by malevolent forces. It was something that's made people realize there's nobody telling me I have to believe in God or I have a soul. There's no more religions really out there with authority. Government's lost in space. They don't know what they're doing. Academia, we can see, is bought and sold. Big pharma, news media. There's nowhere where they could look for any sensible authority figure that would deliver even an objective statement anymore. So that's going to rise. The truth will rise up in individuals. It's not going to be found in our time anywhere. Pieces of it maybe here and there pop up, and then get crushed and run over by the next media cycle. So everyone's going to have to find the truth within themselves. It's a very unique time, and it's very hopeful, even though it feels well. It is the old world order is for thousands of years has ended. It's ending right in front of our eyes. We're watching it being pulled down right in front of us. I don't care what your political persuasion or your religious persuasion. It doesn't matter. You watch it, you're seeing it. It doesn't mean that Christ and the hierarchies are not helping us transform into the next level.
Yes, but the important point is that because of this drama with the adversarial forces, Rudolf Steiner explains about how it's because of that drama that we have free will. And so we have a capacity to refuse the revelations of Christ, and that's an unfortunate thing for those that decide to do so, although they wouldn't agree with me, but that's their business, but I could tell you that I would much rather side with the forces that's referred to when they're speaking like in the Gospel of John, God is love. And so I could just feel sorry for these beings. But like Michio Kushi said, the great teacher of macrobiotics, he said, someday even Al Capone will have supreme judgment. So somewhere down the evolutionary pike, these beings will go through their particular
But
great and challenging it may be and unfortunate, but that the mission of Earth evolution for the individuals that are human at this time is to evolve beyond the realm of this fourth stage of being, the Earth evolution, where we develop our relationship to our ego in preparation for the Jupiter period that arises through the actual. Rudolf Steiner talks about how one must take the warmth of your heart and unite it with the external warmth outside of you. And it's interesting because the image that's associated with that, but at a very subtle level, is the Madonna by Raphael, and that you have the mother holding the baby, and it's that actual exchange of warmth.
Well,
Slow down for a minute. I got to finish the thought.
okay.
So that you have that. This is the vehicle of your development towards the Jupiter evolution. Is that developing the capacity? It's not enough just to develop the light, and the light is something that it relates to the sixth after that, in a certain sense, because you have it is a recapitulation of old sun when light first came into the world, so that we have to get the warmth so that that light is loving, because wisdom without love can be terrifying.
Absolutely. That's why I was bringing up the warmth of the sun, the hours of the day. But one warnings Rudolf Steiner has for everyone, you mentioned those souls that want to reject Christ. He mentions in these time of rights, and this is important to set the stage for the understanding that we are in that time of rights. We won't been here for long, but we're here for a while. But in that time of rights, the love of evil, and think about this, the love of evil, he says, is the greatest danger facing mankind. But in the time of rights, and you can see this not just politically, through policy making, people doing the things that they have the right to do, and they love them, and they consider what they're doing good, holy, and everyone that does something else is not good, including Christians. So the time of rights sets the stage where the love of evil can really flourish if the soul doesn't have a conscience, objectivity to understand what is it actually loving about the evil deed. You can see it, the political positions, discovering liberty and freedom in certain acts that were illegal, horrific, but now they are presented as good and helpful and a right for someone to do. And it's not just abortion, it's other issues also. So what's happening in the time of rights, the love of evil deeds has to bring a consciousness to it. Can't be love of evil without a consciousness. It's otherwise, you're really not sinning. You're falling prey in a temptation. But in a time of rights, you can take something that you love because you love this evil thing. But now in our time, it's glossed over and told you that it's good. So you're doing an evil action that you consider good and helpful, and you're being reinforced by policy making in our time everywhere on the planet. And those that are doing what they always considered to be good are considered evil, bigots, hateful, and dangerous. So this time of rights and the love of evil are, I think it's been a week on deliberating on YouTube about those two concepts and how what's occurring in our time. But that love of evil one, that caught me for a while thinking about it.
Well, to clarify this whole understanding, all one needs to do is consider the words of Rudolf Steiner in his lectures on the mystery centers in reference to the Hibernian mysteries I referenced earlier. He says that as we move to develop the Jupiter evolution, and I paraphrase, we must unite our inner warmth with the warmth of the outer world. And so he says, as we move into the future, eventually we will evolve to the point to where the warmth will be the same thing as love. And so, because people are always want to know, well, what is love? It's that warmth that's worked into the will that has become an action. Because if you remember the beginning of the whole scheme of evolution that Rudolf Steiner describes, the sevenfold scheme of the Christ language, old Saturn is what arises is warmth. That's the first part. That's the proto-physical form. And then the following planetary state is old sun, and there the etheric, the prototype of the etheric comes into expression, and light comes into being. And then in the third stage, you have the old moon, and that's the prototype of the astral. And now that we're on Earth, we have that expression of the ego incarnating within these vehicles. Like I frequently make the reference of, it's like Arjuna and Krishna riding in the chariot. And there's the three horses of the physical, etheric, and astral. But the ego is something that is entirely different from them because it's coming out of that timeless expression, whereas the etheric world can give you an image of the past. It can reflect the astral and bring it to consciousness. The astral consciousness streams to you out of the future, and so that's expressed as the starlight. That's that entering into relationship with the stream of time. But that coming into a true relationship to those things on their own level leads one to that world of duration, as it's called by the Rosicrucians, or that timeless realm that Rudolf Steiner's addressing here. And so it's a state of consciousness. And once one gets to the state of consciousness implied by the Jupiter evolution, it's like St. Paul says, ye shall be as the angels. And then you won't have to think in linear terms. Angels, like your guardian angel, can gain the whole concept in an instant, all simultaneous, rather than having to go through this plus this equals that, therefore this and that equals this and that whole laborious process that we go through within our abstract thinking. One can come to the point where one receives these inspirations from the spiritual world that work through that initially from that transformation of the astral in the realm of imagination and the transformation of the etheric in intuition, imagination, inspiration is the etheric, and then intuition is that physical. So if you look at that, you say, well, what is that physical? And Rudolf Steiner develops the thought about intuition most completely in his book, The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity, originally titled The Philosophy der Freiheit, or The Philosophy of Freedom, so that it's that individual ego. And what is that expression of the ego? It's love. I mean, it's the most liberating thing that you can come to, is that's the realm in which you're truly free.
I and the Father are one. The physical and the ego are one. Yeah, warmth. And it's definitely missing in our time, at least in the public sphere. Not necessarily in private life, but in the public sphere. There's not just because of concepts and ideology, but the more we fight amongst each other in these times of rights, the less we understand. Your microphone is muted.
Oh, you probably thought I was the strong silent type.
Yeah, that was a Charlie Chaplin movie there.
And I just want to make sure that I say that this podcast has been made possible by the generous support of Tyler and Douglas and Vadim and Vivian and Tim and Neil and Ray and Whitney and James and Marilyn and Paula and so many people out there over the times. And I do appreciate your efforts, whether through purchasing my books or just being generous and helping me. Whoops, there's a little minor earthquake here. And but it's enabled me to, with my slim resources, to be able to continue doing things like this. And there's just a small but dedicated group of people that are interested in my ruminations, and that's okay, because there's more and more people out there attempting to unlock the riddles that are to be found within the work of Rudolf Steiner. But as for myself, my first book is The Arcana of the Grail Angel, the Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar, the true Rosicrucian order. And it has a foreword by Douglas Gabriel of American Intelligence Media, a great many diagrams, many of which I inherited from Aaron Pfeiffer, and I added a great many more. And then my second book is The Arcana of Light on the Path. This is more of a meditative tool with a foreword by the noted astrosopher and psychologist, the late William Bento, good buddy of mine. And I think what I'm going to do to consecrate today is share a poem out of this before I continue on. This is the alchemical poem of the Comte de Saint-Germain, and I translated it out of the French. Curious scrutator of the whole of nature, I have known the all, its principle and its end. I have seen gold deep in its power within the mine. I have seized its material and surprised its leaven. I explain by what art the soul within the mother's womb makes it home, carries it out, and as a grape seed placed against a grain of wheat, under the humid earth, the one plant, the other vine, are the bread and wine. Nothing was, God willed, and nothing became something. In my doubting, I sought out that on which the universe is poised. Nothing appeared to sustain the equilibrium or to serve as a support. Finally, with the weights of praise and of blame, I weighed the eternal. It called my soul. I died, I adored, I knew nothing more. And That's just one. I love that poem. That kind of covers everything we discussed today.
Yeah.
But in here is my whole series of Grail diagrams that give you the indications of Rudolf Steiner as laid out in a series of great many diagrams. Like I said, many of which were inherited from Merit for Pfeiffer, and I added a great many more. Unfortunately, the first volume, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, is under reprint right now, so I do not have it available. But I still have copies of The Arcana of Light on the Path, and you can get those on eBay here in the continental U.S. If you're outside the continental U.S., we can work out an arrangement. Just you can contact me through the academia link below, or you can contact me by private message on Facebook. And for those of you that would like to buy me a cup of coffee or something, no amount's too small, you can share with me at paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And I think that I've covered it. And do you like that translation?
That's good. It's good. Oh, I bought a copy of John's books. I got the last one before a reprint, so the Arcana.
Yeah, good for you. Good on you, because I think you deserve it. And I've never really tried to, like, people approach me about, running advertising to things like that, but my book's too difficult. I mean, I have sold copies to people like
it's not too difficult. It's too truthful.
It's challenging. See, because
it's too truthful.
Well, we have this conversation before. We talk about how people, like for example, the precautionary that is with the lecture cycle, Wonders of the World, because you said you were listening to it while driving in your car and you had to like turn it off because you were starting to float out of your body. And yeah, this stuff is real. And the way usually you come into relationship with these types of things when you enter the world of sleep, of which you're either in dream sleep or you're in the unconscious dreamless sleep. Okay, the dream sleep is the astral, the unconscious deep dreamless sleep is the etheric, and then trance would be the physical. Of course, you don't go into a trance at night when you go to bed, but your astral body and your ego leave the etheric body and the physical on the bed so that the etheric body, your life body, can regenerate. And that brings health building forces in, and then you wake up in the morning refreshed, right? Okay, so in coming to understanding these things, the more you can approach it, and people can be intimidated, but you may not realize it, but you may have had far more profound relationship to all of this than either Joe or I in the previous incarnation. You just don't know. You haven't had the opportunity to unleash the legacy of your timelessness. And so,
and the other thing is
part that I want to share.
The final point is everything any layman picks up, they will get a complete understanding to their level of knowledge on any subject. Next time they read it a week later, a month later, a year later, same thing, they'll get something totally different. So it's always a different view and a different image, which is beautiful. It's like life. It's alive. It's living. And this is implanted us every night. We have it all. We just have to want to be interested in aligning ourselves with these secrets of the cosmos and the human being so that we can live life. What do they say? What does Jesus say? More abundantly. More abundantly.
Amen. And thank you so much. That was almost a prayer, so I think we'll leave with that. And I want to thank everybody for showing up, and for those of you that watched the rebroadcast, welcome and adieu.